Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining tonight. My name is Kathrine Richter. I am the co-president of Volt in Denmark. We are the pan-European political party, and we are trying to change the way we work together in Europe by collaborating across our countries to find common and shared solutions to our shared problems. And tonight we're going to have a very interesting and very important discussion because, as you may very well know, we talk about electrification and we talk about changing the way that we consume electricity and energy. And there is a topic that we have a very hard time talking about, and that is the nuclear power. And what we're trying to do tonight is to simply jump into this conversation by trying to understand what has created this nuclear fear, and can we change anything about the way we talk about nuclear? We believe that we can. But really, we hope to get lots of questions and lots of comments during this event, and we'll try to see if we can answer some of your questions during the debate, but perhaps also afterwards in the comments if we don't have time. So thankfully, I'm not going to do this alone. Joining me tonight, we're sitting here in Copenhagen, by the way, but we are live streaming across a number of different platforms. We're also in Italy, we're in Holland, we're in Norway, I believe. We also have some friends there. And what we're trying to say with this is a conversation that we need to have everywhere around Europe, because the way that we generate electricity has to be done with facts and figures and knowledge about the alternatives if we don't try to really have a sustainable way of consuming and producing electricity. So with that in mind, I would really like to introduce you guys, and also we have a visitor from the UK who will be joining us a little bit afterwards, just for a second. But Theis, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone here in our live stream to let them know who you are?
Yes, I don't mind if I do. I'll just keep it short. I wrote my master thesis in political science about Denmark's energy policy in relation to climate change. And in that process, I learned that Denmark only gets 8 to 9% of its total energy from clean sources, such as solar and wind. Most of the so-called renewable energy is biomass, which is not really green, and not that many people really believe that anymore. So after that, I wanted to pursue this a bit more. So I started an organization called Foreningen Atomkraft i Attack, which is the Danish pro-nuclear organization, with my friend Johan Solid, who is masterminding this live stream and all the techniques behind the scenes. So thank you for that, Johan. And I think that was it. So time for you to introduce yourself, Anders.
Yes, my name is Anders Madsen, and I am a Danish journalist, and I'm here because I'm trying to do a documentary about nuclear power in Denmark, whether it has a future or not, and why, and the history of it, because it's been such a ride like everywhere else in Europe, I guess. And that's very interesting, because it's the first time that we can make something that's actually not declared against being nuclear. Just interested, not pro or con. And that's really something in this country, I tell you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to pivot to our amazing John, who sits in the UK. And I know that Johan will switch screens now, so you can also see John. Hello, John.
Well, hello, Copenhagen. This is London calling, I suppose. So yes, my name is John. I wear a number of different hats, but tonight I will be wearing my hat as a researcher of why it is that we are scared of nuclear power, the history and the psychology. So I'm currently doing my doctoral degree at King's College London and Imperial College. But before doing that, I used to advise a number of governments and politicians on all things energy and all things nuclear. And I think we'll really leave it at that. And oh yeah, by the way, I'm Swedish originally, even though you can never hear it.
John Lindberg. Nu fattar.
Exactly. Now it makes even more sense. But I think you both really raised a fundamental issue, which was what has happened to the nuclear debate. I mean, Anders, he basically highlighted it already. You said right now, this is kind of a first in a way, your documentary, and also maybe also even this conversation,
Yes.
that we're trying to seek ways in which we can change the storyline. And as a storyteller, maybe you could highlight a few things in your life where you kind of go,
Yes.
Are there any highlights where you think, okay, this changed my mind, or this changed the whole storyline?
Well, yeah, I'm 56 years old, so I was, and my dad was an engineer, and he was in energy research. He was in interior energy research, but he works at the DTU, it's a Danish Technical University, and they had this zero energy house that was supposed to be a self-sustainable, energy sufficient house that just kind of worked. And it was the craze, this energy house, zero energy house, because it was the future. And the problem, yeah, that was in 71, I think.
Okay.
And that was just at the height of the anti-nuclear movement, because everybody was very afraid of Denmark getting the nuclear power, because then there was the wasteland would come, and there was all the waste, and all those stories were so strong. And then they had this house that was the future, and he was so frustrated because this house didn't work, because they had to put energy into it because it wasn't enough, and it couldn't do the thing that it was supposed to do. So he was just more and more frustrated. And as the 70s they grew old, he got so annoyed every time they were this anti-nuclear. Not you guys, but the other guys, they had this cool emblem, this cool logo with the sun, and it was like everybody loved that. And then you guys, not you guys, but them who came before you, they had the lame logo, which did not, it was a happy something, but it didn't work. So they stood there when you were shopping on Saturday. There was the big group of anti-nuclear activists, and all the chicks were there, and all the cool guys were there, and then all the engineers stood over the other side, and they had like 4 people with spectacles standing, being like really angry because they didn't have anything. So that was basically the thing. And I saw my dad, he was crazy, because why is this happening? Why don't they see that nuclear is the thing? And he was so crazy. And I didn't want to hear it, because all my friends were against nuclear, because everybody was against nuclear. And so we just kind of ignored him. And that became a joke. He became kind of a joke. He was always this going on about nuclear power. And then, of course, there came the legislation in Denmark about not having nuclear power plants at all. So
1984.
Exactly. And so people were just, oh, thank God, we have saved this country. And I was on that. I was marching against this shit. And so then I grew up, and I became an adult, and I started just thinking about it and reading about it, and then it was just like, this is crazy, because it is so much more another story than the one I was being told. And then unfortunately I didn't come to say it to my father before he died, so he never found out that I was one for the cause, and I was sad. But still, the important thing is that it's quite easy to change the story inside your head once you start learning about the numbers and figures and facts and stuff. And that was interesting, especially with the waste, because the waste was the big thing.
I think that's an ongoing thing still. I think we saw some comments today even saying that's great, but the waste we don't.
Exactly. And I was before Corona came, we went to Finland to film the permanent site for nuclear waste, where it shall be lying for 200,000 years, I think it's projected.
A long time, and it's international. They even made it international.
So they have drilled like 1.5 kilometers down the granite, and then they have found the most safe place where the tectonic plates are not like scratching against each other, and then they drill these holes and they put down the waste, and it was an amazing thing to see, because they have tried to do something that really takes care of this in a responsible way, and it was really nice to see a country like Finland, because they were so undramatic about it, and I think it's one of the only countries in Europe that does not have a lot of resistance against nuclear power, because they have been teaching these things for a long time, and Finland are just more pragmatic people, maybe.
Yeah,
because
just to qualify that, the Green Party, the Green Party in Finland is pro-nuclear. Normally, the Green parties in Europe, they sort of sprung out of the resistance to nuclear power. So that's just an interesting fact, and what caused this is outside of the scope of the conversation today. But I think it's really interesting what Anders is shining a light on here, that nuclear power was made uncool by popular culture. The anti-nuclear movement, they won by using fear and claims that really did not have firm grounding in solid science. And John, he told us that the whole thing that he's working with basically is how to bridge that gap between the scientific knowledge and the popular conception of nuclear power.
And I think just to go back to what you were talking about before, because I think we're also, I mean, the storytelling that we do, and the narratives, and whether it's popular culture or not, but let's also acknowledge that there was a general fear, and that we had some serious nuclear accidents that happened, and this might even be a good pivot to you, John, just to qualify again what both Anders and Theis has been talking about, that we had some serious incidents. We had 3 Mile Island, we had Chernobyl, and there is reason and quite fair enough reason to say, let's try to avoid such accidents again. But maybe you could talk a little bit more about that from your perspective.
And we have accidents at Chernobyl. You know, the general public has already turned anti-nuclear and turned anti-nuclear long before. You start to see the first resistance against nuclear energy in the 1960s, mid 1960s, and then by 1970, you start to see that the majority of people are actually starting to turn against nuclear. That we are seeing today is by and large identical to the conversations we saw in the 60s and in the 70s and in the 80s. It's about waste, it's about the accidents, and it's about cost. So essentially the conversations we are having today, they are the same 50 or 60 years ago. And that also, so far, we've already been told that this is the key.
There was sort of a displacement of fear of nuclear weapons that kind of spilled over into nuclear energy, even though it's 2 very different technologies. A nuclear power plant cannot blow up like a bomb. You cannot.
What I think is really important in that conversation, and sorry, there's clearly some glitches between Denmark and was really important on the weapons and nuclear power issue, is the fact that it doesn't matter that the facts say it can't happen. It's linked in people's minds, and that's enough. That's good enough a reason. that when you ask people what they think the aftermath of a nuclear accident, they cite what sounds very similar to the aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The notion that imagery is so incredibly powerful, especially if you actually grow up with the threat of nuclear war hanging over your head. I'm thankfully young enough never to have had to endure people that did grow up or were, active in the, especially 80s, when the threat of nuclear war was everywhere. It isn't surprising that the people got terrified. And then,
well, yeah. And I was in those marches in the 80s because I was old enough to have the nuclear weapon threats over my head. So I marched from Copenhagen to Paris to combat the nuclear weapons, and that was the deployment of the Pershing II missiles in Western Europe. So it was crazy, but that was what we did, and that was because we were afraid of annihilation, and that was perfectly spilled over to the nuclear power. It was basically the same thing in our heads. There was no difference. Of course, we knew that there was a difference, but it was nuclear. So you were just against nuclear, and you had these nuclear-free zones in Europe, which was so crazy because it started like nuclear weapon-free, but that suddenly and very fast changed to just nuclear-free. So everything nuclear was bad. So the word nuclear was a bad word, and everything connected to that was awful. And I joined the Greenpeace in '84 because there was a nice girl there, and I had this experience of the nuclear power. Resistance in Greenpeace was as powerful as the fight for whales and stuff. It was just something that you had to have a standpoint against if you want to be pro-life, pro-earth, pro-love. Everything. Nuclear was bad. And it was a really small minority in Denmark. I think like 2 or 3% of engineers, some angry guys like my dad, who was just sitting there and party pooping, and the rest of us was so agreed that this was don't do it, man. We're gonna die. And that was, I think it was the same I know it was the same in Sweden, and I think everybody else except from the Finns, they were the only guys who didn't go crazy.
If you're not panicking, something is seriously going to be wrong with you. And this is where radiation is the same way. We have been told that this is the most dangerous thing on the planet. We are not.
But then, as you said, it's not so, it's absolutely natural and normal to have this fear. So then I guess the next step is when we look at climate change, we've seen a change in our narrative, a strong change when it comes to the discussion about global warming and climate change.
Yeah.
And there seems to be a consensus. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn when I say seeming to be a consensus that climate change is really bad.
Yeah.
And so, for example, you can look at the data. I tweeted about this today, but 26% of the electricity across Europe is generated by nuclear power.
Yeah.
So I guess my question to you would be, in your mind, how can we address the fear that, as you, with your orange, explained, is quite naturally, inhabiting our world?
Yeah. So I'm going to be a bit controversial and put an orange-sized hole through the nuclear industry's entire comms campaign. Linking nuclear power and climate is unfortunately not going to do it. Because climate change is terrifying. A lot of us are genuinely terrified of climate change and the consequences that can or will have. And linking something we're afraid of with something else we're afraid of, that's not a clever idea, is it? As far as I'm concerned, the evidence is quite clear on that nuclear power in sort of the role as the climate savior at best leads to what people would call reluctant acceptance, i.e. this is a deal with the devil, but it's a deal that I'm willing. But that's clearly not the right way to do it. For me, in terms of nuclear energy, can help us address energy poverty around the world. You know, there are almost 800 million people who access electricity. And in this day and age, I find that to be repulsive. Nuclear energy is actually not a way to resolve climate change, but it's a way to build a fundamentally new society, which is going to be more equitable, fairer on a global scale, not just in the West, but in all parts of the world. And for me, I think bringing out these arguments is so important, but they are so rarely there.
So when you say that we can use nuclear power in, for example, to address energy poverty, why can't solar and wind, for example, address energy poverty?
Those that live in energy poverty shouldn't just have access to a light bulb. They should have access to what we do. And in order then to have, these batteries do not exist, and these batteries probably will not exist for decades. But we cannot wait decades. We have to act change. There is one inescapable conclusion, and that is that the weather is going to become more and more reliable. And we know that having a reliable electricity system is crucial for modern lifestyle. So to pivot towards technologies that cannot reliably provide us with electricity and would be doing so in a way that is actually rather unsustainable, it's not the way forward. And that's where I think nuclear energy in different solutions, we're not talking about just the sort of gigawatt huge power stations, but also, you know, we're talking about village reactors. I think that is going to poverty.
That's one reason that we need to have a global solution to climate change. It's all well and good that we here in Denmark have our national target and work hard on that. Even if Denmark, and I know that this might be unpopular to some listeners, even if we manage to completely nullify all our carbon emissions, it would make a dent in the global challenge of climate change. And I think that's why John is pivoting to talking about energy policy. Because what we need to do in the rich world is helping push forward those technologies and those innovations that the Indians or the Chinese or the Ethiopians would choose willingly, because it's simply the cheapest solution.
So then basically, based on what John says, we have to address the fear, and we have to address it on a global scale, and we have to make sure that we look towards a shared way of addressing energy poverty. You're working on a project right now, Anders.
Yes.
And maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit about that project.
Well, it's not an energy project.
It's not, no.
No, so I was hoping that you didn't expect that.
No, not at all. It's basically your.
Yes, I'm happy. Yeah, no, I'm sadly not having any revelations about the new cold fusion or anything. It's just an effort that we are some guys from the national Danish television trying to make a documentary about the possibilities of nuclear power in Denmark, and would it be an idea if it were not prohibited to have it here? So that's just to try to look at it with new eyes, and for a new generation that has not been brought up with this nuclear power and the nuclear weapons fear that has been so massive for our generation. So maybe when you tell these stories to people who has not been having all the stories that I have been having, so it would work in another way. And that's the thing that we are trying to do. Just by looking at nuclear, what has been done, the accidents, what are people doing now, where are they going forward, and where are they not, and how could it be done? So that's a big thing in Denmark, because everybody in the Danish national television is like, oh, can we do this? And because it's political, and it's in Denmark we have this windmills, and that's our thing. And then it's a story we do not want to change because it's such a nice story about those windmills, and they are so beautiful. So, but it's such an interesting story to have to tell to people. That nuclear power has potential, and has potential now that it didn't have back then, and it will have even more if things go as they could go about new technologies.
No, because I wanted to explore this a little bit, because you mentioned that there was a lot of concern or even fear about your project, about this documentary that you're doing in even the Danish national broadcasting system. But maybe just like, what kind of stories do you usually, or what kind of fears do you usually get met with, or when you address this?
About nuclear?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's just the waste. What would you do about the waste? What would you do? And it's just like John said, the cost of these plants are so humongous, and they take so many years to build, and it is dangerous, and it is wasteful, and it is bad. So that's basically the things, the three stooges that comes every time, is that where would you put the waste, and what would you do about the accidents, and what about the cost? And just a tiny little thing about, we had this research facility in Roskilde called Risø, that where we have been doing research for nuclear since the 50s. And it has been dismantled now because it was bad science, and so all these likely nuclear waste thing from the plant, it's not a plant, it's a farm, and well, it's some buildings. And nobody in Denmark wants to have this waste, which is low-grade nuclear waste. And it's been like, could we put it to Lolland? And then Lolland says, no, we're not going to do it. And they are all unanimous behind this thing that we're not going to take this waste. So they have this shit still piled up on Risø, and then they make some kind of, temporarily thing where they can have the waste. And they have this great idea, we put it into barrels. And they have these bad barrels that look like nuclear barrels because it has the sign on them. And they have these standing, and I go into this building where they have them standing and say, oh shit, this is never going to work, because this is just the story once again. They have this bad things there, and it's going to be somewhere for 200 years, and then it's going to be like you can eat it, but still nobody wants it. And that's just a tiny fraction of a research facility, but it's so bad, and the story is so strong that nobody wants to touch it. And even the guys, so now they have to do a permanent thing at Risø because it's there. So, and that's a bad place, and you can go there and have funny kids, and so that's just it. So just in this story, in this reality, it is so funny, and it is so great to have this story about nuclear being not this boogeyman, and just seeing what happens when you tell people this story, and it's almost religious, because it's so like, wow, it's not that bad. We had this Swedish ship once. It was called Sigyn. Okay. It was a waste ship from Swedish nuclear plants that was going to transport the nuclear waste at sea. Mm-hmm. And this ship, Sigyn, it was the ship of terror, because then we were told Sigyn is coming. And it was because we were going to Barsebäck, of course. And so there was just a major mobilization in the anti-nuclear movement in Copenhagen. And we went out and we saw Sigyn. And it was just a ship, but it was like, bad ship is going.
When was this?
That was in the 80s and start of the 90s. So it was so strong that even a ship that was really literally just a ship, it wasn't like it had no big nuclear science in it. And it even was named after some Norse god, but that was not enough. It was the ship of death.
And just to qualify on some of the points that Anders he brought up, you talked about waste and safety and price, But I think one of the biggest limitations to people embracing nuclear is, why do we need it? Do we even need nuclear? We have wind and solar. Wind and solar is growing exponentially, changing the world, taking over the energy industry, kicking out the fossil fuels. Why would we even bother? Because it's politically difficult. So I brought with me some graphs today to qualify the discussion a little bit. And we have this one. It's a graph of the Danish energy consumption. It goes from 1990 till today. And you can see in the beginning, in 1990, it was mainly coal, the blue one, oil, the orange one, and then a little bit of biofuels and some natural gas. And then we reduced the oil a little bit, coal a lot, natural gas a little bit. And the green one here, what is that? That is solar and wind in our energy consumption. It's only 9% here in 2019. It's growing by half a percentage point per year. In the current tempo, if you just take this and then grow it out here, it will take 190 years to reach, or 180 years to reach 100% of the green stuff. And I think that's why we need to have a conversation about nuclear power, because we're not making this extremely fast transition and renewables taking over everything. Renewables need backup, because renewables can't do all the heavy lifting on themselves in its own. There's also another graph here, Johan, if you can put that one on. It kind of It shows the share of clean energy in the energy consumption of Denmark, France, and Sweden. And we start way back in 1960, and we can see in the 70s the share of clean energy in countries, Sweden and France, explodes because they start to apply nuclear energy and use that in their energy mix. In just a matter of 10 years, France goes from 5% clean energy to 35% clean energy. And you can see in the bottom here, Denmark, we didn't really have any transition in the 70s because of the movement that Anders told us about.
It's my fault.
No, it's not your fault. I think it's the people who spin the story and made us afraid when there's not really a reason to be so afraid of it. And then we started in the 90s with some environmental policies and windmills taking off, but it's still going so slow. That's why.
Just trace it back a little bit, because we do have a story in Denmark. And obviously we're in Copenhagen, so I'm going to take a little bit the Danish approach to this. But we do have a story about wind power. We do have a story about how we've been able to prop up an entire industry as well. And there has been investments as well in wind energy. And I guess one of the things that we perhaps should also address somehow when we talk about the fear of nuclear is that one of the arguments, and perhaps John, you can qualify that as well, perhaps at some point, but the idea that we've invested in this story also means that is it maybe too late to turn back? I mean, is there a scope, and maybe your documentary will actually address that, who knows? But are we in a situation in Denmark where we cannot change the story?
Is the fact that, as with most things nuclear, we like to talk about nuclear in isolation from everything else. And for me, that is a huge problem. So nuclear waste, yes, there is some. We see in Finland that the first waste repository for high-level waste is going to be opened shortly. And we know that this approach is going to work. The calculations I've seen from the Finnish regulators is that even if you have a worst case scenario leak and someone lives literally on top of the facility, the annual dose is about 2 bananas, which isn't really that much.
2 bananas.
2 bananas, yeah. And that is assuming that the canisters that you put the nuclear fuel in breaks well before it's meant to eventually disintegrate. And it will start to leak to the surface way faster than it should do, and whatever not. But when it comes to nuclear waste, really, within 1,000 years, the thing is more or less harmless. It's going to remain radioactive for the end of end of the world, because uranium is just slowly decaying away. That will take 4.5 billion years before half of that radioactivity is gone. So yes, it'll be radioactive for a long time, but we need to place this into context. So for instance, coal and the ash that we get from coal-fired power plants, well, that is really toxic and really quite nasty, and that's going to be nasty for all perpetuity. The heavy metals we put into the magnets in wind turbines and into solar panels, that is toxic, and that's going to be toxic for all perpetuity. We're going to have to decommission them at some point. A solar panel might be around for 20 years. What are we going to do then? At the moment, we can't recycle it. So we have a lot of toxic waste that we need to do something with, and we don't know how. But we are focusing obsessively on the issue of nuclear waste when it is actually the waste stream that we know what to do with it. And I think that's really important, to be able to contextualize it, which I don't think we do.
And the funny thing is, if Denmark had been sticking to its nuclear power plants that were protested against in the 70s and got most of it and got all of its electricity from nuclear energy for 50 years, that would produce waste equivalent to like 2.5 tennis courts of waste canisters with 2 meters between them. So that's just, to me, so much more preferable to coal or gas, where you pump the waste literally up into the air and you cannot contain it because there's so much waste. Nuclear energy, there's so small amounts of waste that we can actually deal with it very safely.
So, for instance, the use of fossil fuels, first and foremost coal, we know that given that we are not handling the waste it produces, more than 8 million people die every year due to air pollution. And the particulates that comes out of the chimneys of these power plants, or when people burn fossil fuels at home, that is waste management related deaths. Yet we are obsessing about nuclear waste, which hasn't harmed anyone and never will harm anyone. But again, it's become a sort of boogeyman where the nuclear industry completely fails to address it in a convincing manner. There's no story here. And then we allow the issue to be hijacked when other waste streams kill literally millions every year.
But John, why do you think that the young people are buying this story also? Because I can imagine why we did, because it was just so easy to do the thing with nuclear weapons and all the angst about that. But now I've never met a man or a woman at 20 years of age that has any fear of nuclear weapons, because they do not really think about them that much. But still, if I try to tell young people about nuclear power, they look scared. How come that? Is it just because the engineers was so decent that they didn't want to say that it was not in any way harmful? So, or why is it still a powerful story?
So I think there's two aspects to that, and I'm going to be flipping that on its head. I think the problem is, well, one of the big problems with the nuclear industry historically has been it is an industry which is totally dominated by nuclear engineers and physicists. People that are definitely way cleverer than I will ever be able to come. And that's fair enough. But the problem is that a lot of these scientists and engineers, they are very uncomfortable with making statements such as it is not harmful, because they know that there might be a theoretical risk that is insanely small, but it still might be there. So they'll say, yes, it isn't really that dangerous, but that's not the same thing as saying it's safe. And I think if it is safe, then call it safe. And when it comes to nuclear, that's the case. And to answer the first question, which is the more important one, is why are people still afraid? Well, I would argue that people weren't afraid of nuclear weapons just because of the notion of nuclear war, which is terrifying in of its own, but also of the radioactive fallout that was going to really poison the earth after the war had ended, or the fallout that would come from a nuclear power plant. It's our radiophobia which is fueling this entire conversation. We think that any radiation, doesn't matter how minute it is, from nuclear waste, is somehow really dangerous. It's not, but we still think it is, despite the fact that radiation is everywhere. If you sleep next to someone, you get a radiation dose, and I need to double check it, but I think you get a radiation dose of like 800 bananas a year. Yet most of us are very happy to sleep next to someone.
Yeah,
and that's worse
so it's stuff like this. We need to get radiation into the proper context and perspective, which we have failed to do categorically for the last 70 years.
But how come they are doing a little bit better in Finland, do you think? Because this the manager of the permanent facility in Turku, he was such a nice man. He was not an engineer, and he was just saying this is really not that dangerous in a way that really sounded nice. He was not like being overly cautious. He was just a guy saying this works. Do not be alarmed. And I was. This would be just. Does it need some more sex?
I mean, totally. Sex solves everything, right? And I think that the Finnish approach and also the Swedish approach, because the Swedes have gotten really far in the sort of siting of waste facilities as well, has to do with the issue of trust. And I think the Finnish bloke probably has been asked straightforward questions by the community. Is this going to be dangerous? And he can say unequivocally, no, it's not. It's absolutely fine. And I think that trust is so important.
Yeah.
And historically, the nuclear industry, again, hasn't been really good at that. It's been, well, you little people, you're afraid of nuclear. Well, you're just being irrational little people. So we're just going to stick these facilities in your local community, like it or not, and that's the end of that conversation. And clearly that's not going to work. So you need to be honest. You need to say that, look, yes, there might be a risk, but there are also risks if we're not doing this. But probably the most important thing is that, well, these are the benefits. We need to talk about the benefits. And people that are trying to promote nuclear energy are damn good at talking about all the bad things about nuclear and really apologizing for the fact that nuclear exists. That's the wrong way to do it. There are plenty of anti-nuclear people. They'll be more than delighted to tell people why nuclear is useless. So people that are pro-nuclear should be saying, well, this is why nuclear is absolutely awesome. Because if you look at the psychology underpinning risk perception and what drives acceptance, it actually is first and foremost, do people believe
accident. The accident that I remember certainly is the Fukushima accident. And that prompted the closure on the phasing out of nuclear power in Germany, for example. Like we saw certainly in my lifetime, I would say that I've seen that happen. Yeah. And then just to kind of have a little bit of a bring myself into the conversation as well. Immediately I thought, oh, that's probably a rational decision to phase out nuclear. I didn't really think much about it. I literally haven't given nuclear power much thought. And just like you said, Anders, the whole idea of not living in a nuclear world and not living with the threat of an atom bomb, probably just also, and then not having a conversation about it in the 1990s, probably just also made it an interesting topic to discuss, certainly here in Denmark, where the decision was already made in the 1984. But then Fukushima happened, and the way that I certainly have experienced it, the conversation flared up again. And a few years ago, I started asking a few questions about why don't we use nuclear power? And just like Anders, I feel like I started looking into the facts and figures, and it didn't scare me that much. And in fact, looking at climate change and in the challenge of global warming, is it not actually a sound idea to use that? So. What do you think should be done in terms of challenging the narrative and changing the story? I mean, we know, and I think we've just spent an hour discussing how the narrative is definitely challenged. But then let's use the next couple of minutes to just think about how can the narrative be changed, and what do you think we should start with, John?
Well, I think we need to start by getting our conversation about radiation into perspective. Radiation in high doses is dangerous. Drinking a lot of vodka in large doses, it also isn't that good for you. In small doses, a glass of red wine is pretty good. If you down 2 bottles, that's not too clever. And I think the risks of nuclear and radiation is going to be crucial, because that also drives conversations around waste, it drives conversations around cost.
The reason why we're having this conversation today is actually to kind of build pan-European momentum in order to go to demonstration in Brussels and try to tell the Belgian government, please don't shut down the nuclear power plants that they're going to do. They generate 3 times as much clean electricity as all of Denmark's windmills. And I think if you can just try to take all these advanced things that we talked to today and try to put it into perspective, just like you said, John, how much of a danger is this actually? For example, you threw up the ball of Fukushima before. Fukushima, many people think it's a radioactive wasteland, but actually in Fukushima city, the radiation level is 0.05, and in Copenhagen it's 0.09. So it's almost double here in Copenhagen. And why don't we know this? Why don't?
I mean, I normally start when someone starts talking about Fukushima, I just then tell them about the fact I grew up almost literally on top of a uranium mine. We have some of the highest highest radiation doses in the world where I grew up. And unfortunately, I'm sad to report that third arm that I was promised has yet to appear. Imagine how productive that would make me. And the other parts of the world, in Iran, in Brazil, so on and so forth, where the radiation doses make Fukushima seem like there's nothing there. So it's important to have, you have those factoids around, but don't lead with them. Lead with why the hell nuclear is absolutely brilliant.
We did talk about, John, what we all talked about is the cost of nuclear power.
So I'll just explain it real quick. This data is from the International Energy Agency, which is one of the most reputable sources on comparative energy statistics. It's in Danish, so sorry to the international viewers we've got with us today. Nuclear power is atomkraft, as you can see at the 95% here. You can see that nuclear power costs $43 per megawatt hour of electricity. So that's just over its lifetime. If you take all the electricity and divide it out on the cost, it will cost $45 per megawatt hour. And you can see further down the list, you have onshore, windkraft onshore, that costs $50 per megawatt hour. And you have offshore wind power that costs $70 per megawatt hour. So the whole idea of nuclear being super expensive is really not true. Yes, you can find some specific plants in the UK that became really expensive because they had to borrow the money at a very expensive rate at the market. So that's an expensive nuclear power plant because they got an expensive loan. But nuclear power is inherently one of the cheapest energy sources.
I think going back to the point about narratives, I think again the cost issue is one that's been around for donkeys in the nuclear debate, and again it's a failure on the part of the pro-nuclear community to say, look, these reactors, unless you actually have political interference, these reactors can operate for 60, 80, maybe 100 years. We see nuclear reactors in America now being licensed to operate for 80 years, and most likely they'll be able to relicense it again for 100 years. So we're talking about literally an intergenerational investment that will pay off for literally a century or more. But this is something we never quite hear. And a nuclear power plant, they can operate at capacity factors of 90 to 95%. So they're always there when you need them.
And just to put that in context, a wind turbine will operate for 20 to 25 years. So a nuclear power plant is about 3 times as long at a minimum plant actually produce energy. Nuclear power plants can have a capacity factor of 95%, so it's producing 95% of the time, where wind turbines onshore, like land wind turbines in Denmark, is 28%. So for nuclear power, the reliability...
To just stress the fact that when it comes to nuclear power plants, you can essentially build them and you put them onto the grid. You don't really have to make huge investments into batteries or other technologies to essentially make sure you don't get blackouts. But when it comes to renewables, the more renewables you put onto a grid, the more unbalanced the grid becomes, because the wind will change or the sun will set. So you will need to put a lot of money into your grid. And investing into a grid isn't a bad thing, but these costs are actually not seen when you look at these sort of cost comparisons. You actually don't see them, and in many cases, it is something that is on the energy bill, so everyone has to pay for it.
But I think that part about system costs, people don't really grasp it. I think it's easier just to tell them that the International Energy Agency says that they found through an analysis that generation costs are lower. Just let's go down the road of using levelized plant costs. Of course, I know the grid costs are higher, but it's just, I think it's difficult for people to actually grasp what that means.
Well, I
think that's true, but equally, I think it's important that we actually tell people that, yes, nuclear costs a bit, it runs for so much longer, but also you are being asked to cough up on building these sort of renewable systems through your tax bills, which is, as far as I'm concerned, not always the best way to do it. And again, it's a question of narrative. And I think, again, the nuclear sector has not been very good at telling the sort of story that a nuclear reactor will be there when you're born, will be there as you go through life. Your heart breaks, your marriages, first kid walking, you dying. The reactor is always going to be there with you throughout your entire life. If that's not a compelling bloody story, then I don't think there is one. But we're not telling that, we're never hearing that. And maybe Anders, as the master storyteller, can start to make sure that we do.
I will.
No pressure.
I can set you up now.
Thank you.
No, but I mean, we do actually have quite a compelling narrative challenge in front of us, because the Polish government has set to build a nuclear power plant on the north shore of Poland, and that's set to be finished in, I think, 2033. And that so the idea that there's a narrative change that we have to do, then if you have both identified areas that need to be tackled, need to be challenged, then go forth and do that. No, because I think we shouldn't overlook the fact that there is so much. I was going to say it's just sitting in people's soul almost. There is this narrative in our mind that we have to tackle. But why is it so difficult to compel people with facts and figures? I mean, we again, tonight, and I think we've all kind of been compelled by facts and figures, but it's just not a very.
I would say that going down the facts route it goes counter to the way that we as human beings operate. I mean, and this has been proven time and time again, that 90 to 95% of all times, when we interact with the environment around us, we go through gut feeling. It is subconscious. 5% of all of our engagement, only 5% is actually going to be the sort of the rational or the calculative side. So if you give people facts, that means that they have to engage that 5% of their brain. And we have to realize that nuclear, we are really interested in nuclear. We think nuclear should be spoken about all the time. But most people genuinely don't care about nuclear. They really don't. Most people are sort of the grey middle, like, why should I even care? So going down the facts route is not going to make that difference. We need to tell the story, we need to be human, we need to bring in emotions, and that way we are going to be able to change the way that we converse about nuclear, and then we can start to bring in facts or make sure that what we're saying is based on facts, but facts is not, going to do it.
Are you taking in notes now, Anders?
I think as a journalist, he's probably well versed in this.
Well, yeah, but they had the best singers.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that was just because the other guys had some singers, but they just sucked at it, and that was it. And all the cool chicks were there, and all the party was there, and everything was just nice there. And they had their machine was cooler than the other guys' machines, and that was just it. And before we make this machine, I think the new reactors, they can be kind of cool, and they maybe there'll be some songs, and then it will start, because it's not gonna be the facts, because they have been there all along. So it's gonna be like the coolness about it, and that. Yeah. Just we need a song. I think basically we're gonna need a song. It's gonna be more than one song. Yeah, but
Anders, are you starting?
Yes.
Are you taking the lead?
Exactly. So the thing is just like in a Gladiator. Yeah, when Russell Crowe is going into the arena, he said, "Win the crowd." This is the thing. We have to win the crowd. We have to get Russell.
Yeah.
And Elysium will come.
Yeah.
and I think what we need to do is, and I think you touched upon something crucial, John, that people, they comprehend the world in a simplified way. They need a story that can kind of structure, a narrative that can structure how they understand the world. And that story should be presented through images and feelings, because that's how people remember stuff. So we need to tell a compelling story that we're not going to get there without nuclear energy. And nuclear energy is friendly. It's good people like Anders and Kathrine, and not good people like me who like nuclear power. Just joking around there. And that it's good people who like it, and it's something that you can't be emotional about. You should be angry when they close down nuclear power plants in Germany and Sweden, because they're gambling with the climate. They don't have anything to really replace it with, except for Russian natural or fossil gas. And I think it's important that we have a story that binds together clear pictures that anchor the story, and then that we have some feelings to it, and we understand that people are emotional beings, and that's what we should talk to.
And the story is there. The story has always been there. Yeah. We don't even have to go out looking for it. It stares right in the face. So, maybe it is, as Anders said earlier, and I really agree, we need to bring in more sex into this. That's clearly going to do it. Make nuclear first boring so that people aren't terrified, and then make nuclear absolutely sexy. Yeah.
Let's just go straight to the sex.
This is a safe environment, by the way.
That's it.
That's it. Okay, well, I guess you have your strategy. I was just going to say, I just pulled up my phone, because I did want to really encourage people that if you do have any questions, and you do want to hear some answers straight from John or straight from Theis, straight from Anders, don't hesitate. I'm going to have a look at my phone for the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We have had some comments on the chat as well.
And maybe we should ask how much time Anders has.
I have 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
Anders has 10 minutes, so we're gonna that's perfect.
Children.
Exactly.
We'll wrap it up in 10 minutes, but please just post your answers. Then we got some material for the next time around, because we'll do this again and again.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and then obviously we'll take everyone's advice and dress more sexy next time. That goes for you two guys. That's very yeah.
I think we're beautiful.
No, but I mean, just as a final thing then, because we're still getting some stuff in here, but how does that convince the people who make the decisions? Because I think we also need to understand, we've been talking about how we should address the nuclear fear, and we've addressed how it has arisen, how it came to be, and how it was never tackled properly in the right way, and how we've come to a point where it's going to be very difficult to turn it around. But then at the same time, you also have politicians in some countries that simply say, have a very top-down management. I might say France, some might say other countries, but and then you have countries that totally rely on the popularity of people's decisions. And I would certainly say that in Denmark there is a compelling narrative that's going to be very, very difficult for Danish politicians to disregard. You might have to have some courage with that. So just what would be ideally? What would be your next step to change the narrative? This is a bit of a challenge, perhaps, but what would be your next step? I'm going to start with you, John, and then we'll do you, and then we'll do you.
So from my experience, having advised politicians and governments, the burning question is, why the hell should I care? I have about, every politician has 100 issues on at the same time. So nuclear energy has to be something that is attractive to them, to the politician, and for them to see that there are actually benefits to it. At the moment, nuclear energy in most countries will be the ultimate vote loser. It's not going to be much in it, and the benefits might not come for decades. And in politics, a week is a long time, 5 years is an eternity. So in order to start changing this, we need to start again to get better at why the hell should we care about nuclear, and why is nuclear not good, but why is it crucial? Why can we not have nuclear? And that is a value conversation and bringing a value proposition to politicians, and that has to be tailored to each country, but even more importantly, to each politician. We're all driven by different things. This sort of one-size-fits-all notion, for instance, around climate change, ain't going to cut it. So if there's a politician that's really concerned about the use of Russian fossil gas, well, tell him how nuclear can make sure that we don't have to use fossil gas. If there's someone concerned about climate change, you talk climate change. And if there's someone that's really concerned about social justice issues, well, you talk about how nuclear energy could help to combat energy poverty, poverty generally, and a number of other issues. So because the pro-nuclear toolbox is so broad with so many damn good arguments, pardon the French. So start to use them. Don't just limit yourself onto the one, i.e. to climate change. And that way you can start to have these conversations, but also to understand that with a politician, it takes a bit of time. Don't go in, and also for the love of God, don't do what I've seen some people do, i.e. go in and say, look, you're really stupid because you don't want nuclear. This is why you're stupid. Here's the facts. Go figure yourself. No. Be human and understand that it might take them 2 years before they understand that nuclear isn't scary.
Right. So telling people they're stupid is not the way forward. That's
shockingly enough.
Good. I'll make a note of that. What do you think, Anders?
Well, the same. The same thing. I'm just I'm just trying to put it on television, just to hope that people will see it and maybe start to wonder, because it is a good story to tell. So it's always interesting to tell stories that people don't want to hear, but then when they hear them, they get enchanted. And this is one of those. So it's a nice job. It's really, I was so happy when they asked me, because it was the time is ripe for this. And there's so many stories that are being told over and over again. And here's one that is not being told over and over again. So it's just a nice story to tell. And it has all the qualities of being a good one, because people get really happy sometimes when they hear it. And this is nice. So it's just like this story that has been lying there, and nobody cared about it, and suddenly somebody found it, and now maybe it can be pushed into the light and be something. It's really nice, because I was so... I didn't understand my father in the 70s, why he was so angry. And now I do, because this is really, really... it's so sad that it went so far before it might just stop and go the other way. So it is a nice job to try to put this on television. And I know that nobody wants to look at it. And it's on. It's not on the big channel and the broadcasting. It's just one of the small ones. But still, it will get there, and if we get the right song and the sex, it will get traction. So this is it's not going to be in my time, but maybe some of my 7 children will be able to have nuclear power in their sockets. I know we do have them thanks to the Swedes, but still. I have this house in Sweden. I cannot access it right now, but there's a lake in this house, and over the lake is the power lines from Ringhals. And every time I come there, I point on these and say to my children, "This is the future, children. This is nuclear power coming to you from the Swedes." And they say, "Oh, thank you, Dad." And this is how we do it. There's no other way, because we look at these power lines and say, "This is the thing," and they really feel it, because I've been telling them it so many times now. So I have brainwashed them to love this power grid that is coming from Ringhals, and with the wonder of power and warmth and security.
And can I just say that Ringhals is just one of the most gorgeous power plants in the world.
Yeah.
So if you haven't seen it, go.
Oh, we went there.
Yeah, no, anyone listening, you should go and visit Ringhals. It's set in one of the most just gorgeous setting on the planet, and totally look it up.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a tourist recommendation. We need to write a song, and we need to dress up for next time.
Yep.
And I think that the documentary you will produce will probably have English subtitles.
It will indeed.
It will indeed. So it can be so it can be transmitted throughout.
Yeah. And to have like a quote I think we should put in there here at the end is that those who tell the stories rule the world, because humans comprehend the world through stories and narratives. That's also something we're working with in our organization, using the metaphors of H.C. Andersen, a great Danish writer, The Ugly Duckling, that many people know, that adventure about the one duckling that was different. That is nuclear power. It is absurd and different compared to all other energy sources, because it has such broad wings and it has so much energy. And that's why the other energy sources hated it and started lobbying against it. We're also using the allegory of the emperor's new clothes. When I showed you the graphs before, that Denmark has lulled itself into this belief that, we are a green country, even though only 9% of our energy comes from clean sources. So if you use these storylines that live in the culture and try to frame your argument through that, I think it becomes much more comprehensible for people to understandable for people.
Understandable.
And it becomes human. And
Exactly.
I think that is just so important. This industry needs more human faces, and it needs human faces that actually reflect society more broadly. And I think, if we tell that human story, I think we are in the game again.
So just on that human story notion, what was the title of your thesis, John?
I'm still writing it. It's going to be a long, complicated, really boring sounding thing, as all PhDs have to.
So you've literally taken your own advice? Not.
Well, yes, I'm writing the advice book as we speak.
And then when he comes out of academia, he will go on this. When he comes out of academia, he'll have this journey for a couple of years to unlearn everything to become a human again. That is at least my experience, that you simply need to stop using too complicated terms for things that you can actually explain in much simpler and relatable terms to people.
Which is why I speak to my grandma, who is turning 80 in a few weeks. She hates nuclear with a burning passion. So I can try out all of my human talk on her.
Yeah.
Or worry not.
And we just gotta keep on doing that and talking about it and be shameless.
be shameless and be courageous. That's very good. Look, I would just love to thank you, John, for showing up tonight and for joining us through Skype. And apologies for the bit of a technical issue, but thank you, Johan, for fixing it. Yeah. And I want to thank you, Anders, for taking the time tonight to come out. And I think we're all looking very much forward to seeing the documentary.
Oh, yes.
It's going to be very, very exciting.
When it will finally come.
It'll finally come. Well, maybe we'll have some behind-the-scenes footage or something that can get leaked to tease it up or something. Yeah. And of course, Theis, thank you for helping to set this up. I think what you're doing is really, really important, humanizing this discussion. And most importantly, thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. As we said in the beginning, we're joined with people from all over Europe, and we hope that this discussion tonight has been inspirational, and maybe you can take some ideas from our conversation. But certainly keep peppering us with questions. Keep raising the issue where you are and with your families and your friends, certainly. And with that, maybe Johan, do you want to come out and just wave a little bit, because you've been sitting in the back there working so hard, humanizing the rest of us.
Hey guys, I'm sorry for the technical issues early on, but there was something with the connection and so on. But I'm so glad to see everyone turn up and watching the live stream, and thank you for John and Kathrine and Theis and Anders, all of these guys, and thank you so much, and bye.
See you next time.
You can just make the
No, but really signing off tonight. It's been really good, and keep asking your questions in the chat or in the event, and we'll try to we'll try to answer them as best as we can, and have a nuclear night. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Bye.